Whether you love him or hate him, you got to give New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio credit for one thing. He doesn't look like he gives up easily. De Blasio and Archbishop Timothy Cardinal Dolan touring through a pre-kindergarten classroom in the Bronx today. The mayor even got Cardinal Dolan to offer his own call for universal pre-K, though the cardinal would not opine on how it should be paid for. And next week, Mayor de Blasio's wife, Shirlene McCrae, will head to Albany to try to convince lawmakers to support the mayor's city tax funding plan for pre-K, that over Governor Cuomo's funding proposal. And there's been a lot of talk lately about why Bill de Blasio doesn't just sort of triangulate on this issue, claim a victory while accepting the governor's offer of state funding for universal pre-K. Why do you think he's holding so tight to this issue?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question. One would think that here is the new mayor of New York, who one of the central pieces of his campaign platform was universal pre-kindergarten. He had called for a tax on the wealthy to do it, but the governor stepped in and said, you know what? Don't worry about it. You don't have to tax anyone. I'll do it from Albany. One would think that you would quickly say, I'm the new mayor. Look what I got the governor to do. Look, I think it's two things. I think first it is the notion of taxing the wealthy is a really strong progressive talking point. And I think that in and of itself, that entire concept is something that some people in the political spectrum agree with. And so I think that is one thing. I think it's sort of taking care of your base. And two, I think, he wants to be able to have greater access and control of the funding that will actually take care of universal pre-K. And then if you have that funding, it sort of allows you to make decisions perhaps elsewhere in your budget with other decisions you have to make.
Contracts.
Well, perhaps. I don't know if that's the reason, but certainly it certainly gives you some flexibility. If you control the purse, you have the flexibility. If you don't control the purse, then you don't have the flexibility.
If the mayor is perceived as losing this fight, which is really one of his first big fights as the chief executive of the city, I mean, you served as a chief executive. If you pick one of those fights, or if you get one of those fights thrust upon you and you wind up as the perceived loser, how much political power does that sap away from you? And is that part of the thinking that goes on when you're sitting in a big chair like that?
Well, it is, and you want to be successful, because what you are as an executive is you want to be able to say, we've accomplished X, Y, and Z. This is why this is so confusing, because he cannot get this tax through Albany. The Senate's not going to go for it. The governor's not going to go for it. So I think you're right on point. I think it's he wants to show the folks who supported him that he hasn't given up, but he's not going to succeed. And so how... And maybe this issue that has been raised by some, that maybe he doesn't understand that a mayor is an administrator, an executive who has to get things done. He just isn't there for the purpose of raising issues. It is confusing, though, because he cannot win this one.
What I find interesting, and I didn't know if I was going to say this publicly, since I've known Mr. de Blasio for more than 20 years, but I mean this in a respectful way to him, I think somebody needs to remind him that he's no longer public advocate with that platform, and that he's the mayor.
What do you mean?
Meaning that when you're the mayor of New York, every word that comes out of your mouth is dissected by about 40 reporters that follow you each and every day. Every moment that you go somewhere or do something, we analyze how you said it, what you said, not just your exact words, what did you mean by it, how did those react to it, sort of the point that you've already heard. And to this county executive's credit, because I live in this county, I don't recall many political battles that he had. And it seemed that over 20 years. And it seems that de Blasio's having one 2-3 times a week. And now it's playing out on page 1 of the newspapers where they're pitting him against supporters of charter schools. It's a no-win situation right now.
I love it when you give me the perfect segue, Dominic, because Team de Blasio and Mayor de Blasio also refusing to steer clear of the debate on charter schools, today taking to the radio to defend his decision to block 3 charter schools from using public school facilities, saying, quote, we're going to treat them with an equality as the same way we treat traditional public schools, and we're not going to favor them the way the Bloomberg administration did. He also noted that a lot of them are funded by, and this is a direct quote, very wealthy Wall Street folks and others. Understanding that charter schools are still something of a sore spot with the far left or with very progressive New Yorkers or far progressives, why did Mayor de Blasio pick this fight right now, especially with what's going on with the pre-K fight?
Yeah, so the politics of choosing the fight now are baffling for that reason. On the heels of his trip to Albany, where the message was supposed to be about universal pre-K, he then issues, his Department of Education issues an order that it will end co-locations in 3 schools, one that's currently existing, one of the highest performing, if not the highest performing middle schools in New York State, is going to end the contract for it to have a new space, and then stop 2 schools that had already been granted space from getting that space. Now, regardless of your feeling on charter schools, from a messaging standpoint and a communication standpoint, why would you completely change the dialogue basically the day before you're heading to your sort of culminating rally to get universal pre-K done in Albany? Why would you pick this fight that day? And what you saw happen in Albany was the theatrics of de Blasio trying to get a message out about universal pre-K, and then a rally of some 10,000 people in support of charter schools, and the entire discussion became de Blasio's fight over charter schools. So, you know, why he did it? Look, in the course of the campaign, he made it very clear that he didn't like the Bloomberg administration's education policies with respect to charter schools and co-locations. So to that end, he's certainly fulfilling a campaign promise. But in terms of the optics of the school he chose, and the timing, I wish I had a better answer for you.
And especially, I mean, the other thought that came to my mind was, why do it this year? Why not wait until Cuomo wins re-election? Everybody assumes that Cuomo's going to, and then bring the issue up. Obviously, you made the campaign promise. You have to take on the issue at some point. Nobody said de Blasio had to take this issue on today. He had to take it on this early in his administration.
Well, you know, part of it is his head is fairly large with a victory that was fairly significant. And so he's taking that victory from a political perspective, including his supporters in the teachers' unions and others, and he's laying it out quickly to gain the inertia that he's picked up during the campaign.
Well, let me ask you another executive question then. How fast does that political capital go bad? You know, how much of a time do you have to use that political capital before it goes away? Obviously, if you run into self-inflicted wounds, some of that political capital sort of erodes on its own.
It does. It's like a bad apple. The bad apple sits in the basket and it just rots away. What he's doing is he's created several bad apples in his first month, in my view. And those bad apples are affecting the basket. And you can't, that's why you can't keep losing his battles, because ultimately people are saying, look, he's all talk. He doesn't have the wherewithal to accomplish our goals. And that's a real difficulty.
Did you ever have a feeling in the aftermath of an election where you're like, well, I've got this mandate, but I've got this limited amount of time to get this through, or that?
You do, and you feel a certain. There's a restlessness. You want to get going. You know, you've been elected. People have supported you. You're feeling high on that support and that support of people and on the issues that you raised. So your first thing to think is, oh, I've got to get this done. But the reality is, you, especially as an executive, you run into the legislative agendas, you run into political agendas, you run into the citizens' others' agendas, you run into all, and suddenly, in order to accomplish parts of those, you have to dissect them and set them out in some sort of timetable. I think you do.
And what he needs to be careful about, I'll make this point quickly, he's becoming a punching bag for the city's press corps. And he needs a couple of victories. I don't care how small they are, but he's got to turn the tide. I mean, it's not looking good right now for this mayor.
You know, sometimes I wonder if we overestimate the importance of us, the press corps, in all of this. You guys are in the.
If you think that we are, pick up the newspapers every morning that everybody else is purchasing and looking at page one.
I would say this. You know, there is this desire to say that it doesn't matter. A perfect example: in the course of the last, between the schools not being closed, the charter school, the caught on camera speeding after doing your entire platform of more safe streets. You know, they seem like sideshows, as the mayor called them, but those sideshows are sort of very meat and potatoes to average New Yorkers. You know, the fact that you say one thing and do another, that has a resonance to people. It may not be, you know, life and death, war and peace, but it certainly sort of gives an insight to people, and it colors your perspective of that individual. So I wouldn't say it, I wouldn't dismiss that kind of coverage.
All right, but all of this may be small potatoes compared to what really could be the main course of the de Blasio mayoral headaches. The city worker union contracts, we were talking about them before the election even came. The mayor's budget director is saying he's going to want concessions from the unions on health care costs if, that is, the unions get the pay raises that they've demanded. How dangerous is this issue and that union support for Mayor de Blasio?
Well, to the mayor's, to no fault of the mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, one of the major criticisms that I think you can give of Mayor Bloomberg is that he did allow for these contracts to go unnegotiated for years on end, and it was his responsibility to get them taken care of. He didn't do that. So Bill de Blasio has been left with a huge plate in front of him.
Well, and he gets stuck with the bill politically as well, because the unions backed him.
Sure. So look,
election.
I mean, the unions are going to have to be realistic, and the message that you're hearing from the mayor's office is that they're going to have to be realistic. Healthcare seems to be on the table already from the mayor's perspective. That is to his credit. That's what a good manager is supposed to do. But he is. The flip side of that is because he's built such goodwill with the unions in the course of the campaign that he may have some more flexibility with them in the long haul. Whereas if you run a campaign and the unions are against you, you win. It's sort of you've got advantage at that point. They came into this thing together, which may give him some greater flexibility to get some concessions, because retroactive raises and settling up, all of these contracts by the end of this year is a monumental feat, and he's got a lot of work ahead of him. So I give him a lot of credit for floating healthcare out there so early.
Yeah, I do too, by the way. I mean, this is the issue for government. It is unsustainable. And since he does have a good relationship with the unions, this is the opportunity to work with them to deal with that one issue, if nothing else. And it's going to be a tough one.
How big are the stakes for the mayor, Dominic?
These folks are part of his base. He's got to deliver, but the unions have to give up some concessions. I agree. It's a major issue. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And when you look at the mayor right now, he's down. And so, it's going to be, he's got to get some victories, and hopefully this will be one.
We've talked about the mayor standing in relation to Governor Cuomo. The punches that he's taken from the press and all these smaller issues, does that hurt him in his standing with the union? Does that hurt him in negotiations with the unions?
It hurts him all across the board. He looks weak. I don't understand why you would battle with Governor Cuomo. You cannot win when he's the governor and you're just the mayor. You may be the mayor of the world's largest city, but he controls the entire state. He cannot win that battle.
Yeah, Dominic's right. One of the problems with the sort of knocks he's taken thus far is, we talked about sort of on the heels of your election having some momentum. You're going to need that momentum both for your adversaries and your allies. And if you're taking some knocks and then you're going into a negotiation with the union, and you don't want it to get contentious because you're already having a hard time for the last couple of months. So it is a fair point that could very well, I don't want to say hamstring him, but it's certainly a consideration of what kind of power do you come into that negotiation with if you've been taking so many lumps over the course of the last couple of weeks and months.
All right, we're going to take a break here on RFL. When we come back, we often talk about red states and blue states, but what about a red and blue New York? I mean, it is one of the most liberal, most reliably democratic states in the nation. So how serious are what we'll call upstate concerns on issues like fracking and guns and more? We're going to get into that next.